Hey everyone, welcome. Mondays with Matt. Matt, great to have you here. I'm out in New Orleans today with a quick plug, by the way. I should do a quick plug for the Alliance Conference coming up in March of 25. So we're here with all the event organizers and the Visitors Bureau planning the event. So really looking forward to having as many of you join us there as possible. So Matt, this last couple of weeks, I know you do a lot of Think Spaces publicly, but we also use Think Spaces as one of our methodologies in-house when we're working with clients. And you've been running a lot of Think Spaces these last couple of weeks with various different clients. And you had some interesting observations because you've been meeting with faculty groups and administrator groups and staff groups and kind of hearing perspectives from different schools. And you're picking up on these different cultures at different schools that are definitely impacting different outcomes at those schools. Kind of set us up on what's been top of mind for you that you were sharing with me earlier this week.
Yeah. What I really observed was what I would call this higher education nostalgia. Like that nostalgia is all over the place. We're different than industries. We shouldn't be talking about industry when we're thinking about modernizing higher ed. So that was one. The second was, well, we don't want to make it so easy for students because we need to show them and be able to have them go through rigor because that's what the workforce needs. That was
Okay.
two, and I was like, it was eye-opening. And then the third was we are the disseminators of knowledge. We know everything and we're the experts, and that's why students have to come and they have to learn it a certain way that we are disseminating knowledge through. And all three of those, I started to recognize this is actually holding higher ed back because I feel it's handcuffing presidents and innovative leaders and even campuses from actually transforming because all three of those things are
Are getting in the
hindering
way. Yeah.
of outcomes,
So just to
right?
put it in context for people watching is, I know some of you who've been through Matt's Think Spaces know that Matt likes to kick off Think Spaces when we're doing future visioning with schools. One of the first activities you do with people is, hey, what does modern look like, right? And you use Netflix and Uber and some of these other examples, Starbucks, where we all shop to say, what's your experience there versus what's our experience at the school, right? It's a great way. People love. But these last couple of weeks, that when you were running that part of the exercise is when you heard don't compare us to the marketplace because higher ed is different, right? And you see that as a red flag. I'll have you talk about that more. And then this rigor thing, and then this we are the source of knowledge and information. People need to come to us, and they just need to take it the way we deliver it because we have something nobody else has, right? That mindset. And you're seeing all three of those as hindrances. Let's unpack the first one real quick, right? Anything that jumped out at you, or what's the caution there? What's the concern there? And what can schools do to break through it?
Yeah, I think the part that took me back was I wasn't even trying to design a modern campus at that moment. I was trying to get them to understand what modern feels like to a student, what modern feels like to themselves.
To
Because in
us,
order
yeah.
for us to design what a modern campus is, you actually have to define what modern feels like when you are in market, when your students are in market. Because what is happening is these students are coming from those experiences and they
Right.
walk into a little bit better than a 1990s experience on a mobile app. A 1990s experience on how to get enrolled, a 1990s experience on how you advise. Like we're starting to recognize that, hey, maybe that's not the way we should be designing. But because they get so handcuffed by the fact that they say, well, we're not other industries, so don't compare me to Amazon or Uber or Netflix or iTunes or any of it, Starbucks. All I was trying to get at was what is really modern in society?
Feel
And
like.
if you define that, my first question is, are you providing that to your students? And because they're handcuffed to like, well, we don't want to compare ourselves to other places because modern looks different in higher ed. First of all, they're not able to define what modern means in higher ed itself. So I think the first thing leaders in these institutions have to recognize is that if your people aren't willing to look at what modern is, you probably don't have the right people running your organization. As simple as that. You can't become modern and serve to modern students if you are still trying to do 1970s type of modern campus operations.
So as a leader, first step is move people towards this conversation. And when you're feeling significant resistance, you've either got to intervene and do some change management or ask the question, do these people even belong anymore at our institution?
I'll be pretty candid. If the people can't define what modern is and they don't want to do it, they certainly are not going to represent your campus as being modern. And honestly, and if your campus doesn't want that, put that on every brochure when you send it out to your students, when you're recruiting them, stand on the soapbox. If you mean and you have, hey, we're different than industry, stand on the soapbox and tell them we're going to operate like the 1990s because higher ed is different. Higher
Yeah.
ed is not the same consumer like students are customers, they're consumers, and they're products. And you better start to define them as that because if you don't define them as that, you're defining an institution modernization, not a student-centric modernization. Sorry, I was a little
No, no, no. I'm
passionate
glad you.
about.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up to close that one out. But I think it ties to this next rigor thing, right? Because nothing wrong with rigor, right? It's an important part of pedagogy and all that. But you're sensing that rigor is almost being overcompensated for at the risk of underprepared students.
Yeah. So the conversation around rigor was happening when we were trying to streamline how a student engages on campus, what they have to do, what are the steps they could do. And our comment was, we gotta remove the barriers on campus. And one of the folks in the think space, and of course everything is anonymous, right? One of the conversations were, well, in order for our students to be prepared for the workforce, they have to go through rigor.
Right. That statement alone is a legit statement, right?
Well,
but the context was completely off. Yeah.
Let me push on that. These people who are putting in rigor, will they be able to survive in industry with the rigor that they think they're putting on? Like, could they, because you're asking them to jump through hoops, you're getting 3 signatures on something, you're making them, have to do 3 extra assignments, which is unnecessary. You put that type of rigor in a industry, they will fail miserably. Why? Because industry operates in an efficient manner. We don't want that excessive rigor inside of the industry. Like in our consulting business, as soon as someone is doing extra work on something that I'm like, that's redundant, remove it, because we don't want to make that a utilization or energy waste. Like, I think that's the thing that I want people to recognize. Rigor in terms of, getting to class on time, making sure you're prepared. Like, all those I get that. But when you are putting barriers for the sake of barriers, like, oh, you can't use an iPad to take notes because we believe it's better if you are using handwritten notes because that's how we learned, or there's some studies that have done. Well, the studies of these students who have never come through a pencil and paper haven't been there. So you are putting rigor on something that isn't. You know what? In every meeting, what do we use? We don't use pens and paper. We're using computers. We're using iPads. We're using Otter. Hello, higher ed. Where's your rigor to teach us to use those technologies? So rigor, I'm not against rigor. I want people to go through the right standards and understand what needs to be done. But my question is, the people that are putting in rigor for these students, will they survive in the rigor of industry, in the model that they're instilling in our student? No.
Right. So I think that's the point, right? Is rigor incorrectly applied or rigor applied using an old school playbook is actually dangerous for our students. But rigor, when correctly applied in the context of today's industry, is a very important part of the higher education experience, right? The question you had, I think the way you were pushing at with some of the faculty who were on that call was, is your rigor modern? Is your rigor relevant to today's student or employee experience? And I think that's a challenge to everyone, right? So I think this is another conversation that needs to be taken up by provosts and academic leaders to challenge faculty to say, look, rigor is great. That's what we're known for, but it's got to be modern. It's got to be relevant to today's time. All right, final one before we run out of time. It's this idea of, okay, we believe something about our storehouse of knowledge, and that makes us or gives us a certain set of beliefs that aren't maybe correct. Walk us through that one.
Yeah. So the element of like, we are the disseminators of knowledge. The reality of it is knowledge is very accessible today. Like,
yeah,
every researcher has a book on it. They have research papers on it. Knowledge is accessible to a student at their fingertips. We live in a fingertip world. With ChatGPT being able to summarize, being able to like put content from an article into a podcast is starting to get people to recognize knowledge is actually everywhere, and I can source it in the way that I absorb content. That's the first thing. What I want people to recognize is knowledge isn't the asset only because it's accessible everywhere, right? So even if you have the research document, I could put it into ChatGPT and decipher it a certain way in the best way that I learn it, right? So that's one thing. But it also allows that, hey, while that research paper is great, how about the 5 other professors writing something about it and is also out there from another university, another institution? Hey, look at Abbott Labs. Somebody is doing it inside of Abbott Labs. Knowledge is accessible everywhere. The job of educators is to bring people to be able to think through that knowledge, which is accessible, allows you to challenge questions around, hey, you wrote this other professor wrote this, Abbott wrote this, tell me why these are different. But if they're saying, hey, they got to sit in my classroom and learn the way that I want to disseminate it, I hate to tell higher ed, the days of that nostalgia are going away. And the more personalized education becomes, if you're just a disseminator of knowledge, you're going to have struggle to keep students in your classroom.
That's right. I know we're out of time, but here's a question for you, Matt. How should people continue this conversation with you? Because it's really 3 different conversations. We could have broken this up into 3 different modules, but I'm glad we did it this way, because let's have people share with you their thoughts, their frustrations, their ideas on LinkedIn on this topic. And then maybe we dive into a more detailed one, or maybe even we do a beehive if there's some energy around it, because these are 3 very important conversations to be had. Closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, we'll ask people that comment on it here. We'll comment on each one of those things. And then, yeah, we'll convene a beehive on each one of them, or we do all 3 at the same time. You know what? Yeah, I want pushback. I want us to think through this, because higher ed nostalgia is handcuffing them to a historical way of operating. And we just can't operate like that as we move forward.
All right, Mondays with Matt, it never disappoints. Thanks, Matt, and we'll see you all next week.